Alright, we need to talk about Ubisoft. Many of you may recall that over the last year, they've faced a series of accusations regarding an abusive work environment that has gotten Ubisoft in quite a bit of trouble, and they've faced quite a bit of backlash as a result. Namely due to leadership negligence that just allow this to happen. These stories specifically really began to come out back in June of 2020, after which Ubisoft posted this update apologizing for everything, talking about how they must do better. We have started by launching investigations. And we did start seeing certain executives who were accused of abusive misconduct taking leave from the company. So on June 26th, Jason Schreier reported that Ubisoft placed 2 executives on leave following misconduct allegations. And then from there, we heard, and this was really the big one, that Serge Haskowit, formerly one of the most influential figures in Ubisoft in terms of what games get greenlit, was ousted. As Jason reported here, the following month on July 11th, 2020, Ubisoft just announced that Serge Haskowit, the most powerful creative force at their company and the man at the center of multiple recent allegations involving abuse and abating abusers, is resigning. But beyond Serge, 2 other top executives resigned as well. Yanis Mallet, head of Canadian Studios, and Cecile Cornette, head of HR. Cecile in particular especially failed at her job. Jason emphasized what a huge deal Serge's departure in particular was, because with one word he could greenlight or cancel a project. Many Ubisoft employees believed he was too powerful and close to the CEO to ever be ousted, no matter how many allegations emerged. And for those who want more extensive details, that same day an article was released by Jason on Bloomberg in regards to this specific story, and all of the links to relevant reports you can find in the description below if you really want to track all of the specifics over the past year. But beyond that, Ubisoft earlier in July published this post that has a headline that reads, "Change starts today," and it was basically Yves Guillemot outlining some of the changes that they were planning, committing to overhauling the company structure so that it can be a healthier work environment, noting how the types of inappropriate behavior we have recently learned about cannot be and will not be tolerated. We are not looking for a quick fix, but rather a structural shift. We have implemented or started to implement a series of initiatives that will serve as a roadmap as we listen, learn, and act. Wow, this sounds like how a company speaks when they release a broken live service. Yves emphasized how they appointed a head of workplace culture, how they're beginning to host a series of employee listening sessions, moderated by different external facilitators. They're also launching global employee surveys. Investigations are still ongoing. They're reviewing policies and procedures and committing to diversity and inclusion. And all of that sounds like they're actually putting in a lot of effort to overhaul things, and they have, made top executives who were accused to resign. But as you'll see later in today's video, apparently employees have not felt the effects of these so-called overhauls, and they feel like things have largely stayed the same. And back in July of 2020, it was also reported that one of the main issues with why perpetrators could get away with their toxic behavior and abusive behavior is that HR was useless. As reported by Games Industry here, half of the recent cases of toxic behavior unearthed at Ubisoft had previously been flagged to HR, but they chose to ignore it. Every complaint brought to HR about toxic behavior, harassment, or sexual misconduct was met with remarks such as, "They're creatives, that's how they work," or "If you can't work with them, maybe it's time to go." So it was either, that's just the way it is, or either deal with it, or get out. This is not our problem, except it is your frickin' HR. And as Ubisoft began to be ousted on this front, apparently HR was mainly looking out for itself, with head of HR Cecile Cornette trying to clear HR's name and distance HR from its responsibility in the current crisis. This was the mentality of the head of human resources. Forget the humans, how do we save our jobs? How do we save ourselves? And one bombshell in this article is that according to a source who spoke with French news outlet Liberation, a source reported that in 2019, Cecile Cornette said that Yves is fine with a toxic management team as long as the results coming from these managers exceed their toxicity. This is the CEO we're talking about, who clearly knew that this was going on and said, well, as long as we get the results, treat people however you want. Then on July 21st, 2020, Jason Schreier released yet another investigative report, really spotlighting the abusive behavior of leadership, the negligence, the complacency. Ubisoft has known about these problems for years. And here's the article in question that really goes into detail about Serge in particular, but other members of leadership, and how the Guillemot brothers have just kind of let all of this happen and have cultivated this bro culture within the studio and have treated it like basically a frat house instead of a professional work environment. And worst part is that Yves Guillemot, the CEO, has yet to take responsibility. Even though reports say that Yves knew about all of this and just kind of let all of this happen, Yves has yet to say, I have culpability in this, I should have done more, or I shouldn't have been complacent. During an investors call, Yves Guillemot was directly asked if he takes responsibility for anything that happened, and his response was basically to deflect and talk about how he felt betrayed by his cohorts, even though he knew what was happening and just let it happen. So this is the basic outline of what's happened over the last year, and many people were hoping that Ubisoft would learn their lesson, that leadership would take this reality check and use it to better themselves and the company. But according to news outlet Le Telegram from France, very little has actually changed, or the employees at least have not felt much in the way of change, and this was translated and paraphrased by this games industry article whose headline reads, Ubisoft has reportedly made minimal changes following abuse allegations. As legal proceedings are kickstarted, internal sources point at the lack of accountability since reports of toxic culture last year. So let's take a look at this, and I'd like to comment along the way. So once again, an investigation by French publication Le Telegram, which emphasized that despite all of the changes that Ubisoft claims to have made, the impact of these changes seems to have been minimal so far, the publication reported. So it sounds like Ubisoft shuffled some stuff around and maybe hired a few new executives to replace those that resigned following the accusations and allegations, but that shuffling has ultimately yielded very little. The impression right now is that it's more for show than actually implementing changes that will take this issue as seriously as it should be taken. I said before that one of the main issues is that HR just didn't care and weren't really doing their jobs, and former director of HR, Cecile Cornet, who retired after the allegations, was one of the key people who let all of this happen. And while she is being replaced by Chief People Officer Anika Grant, apparently her appointment just hasn't been all that effective, with one of the sources who Le Telegram spoke to saying that they don't expect anything to come out of these new appointments, as the HR staff who cover the harassment issues are still in position. Cecile may be gone, but there were plenty of others within HR who were complacent and complicit to all of this. They haven't fully gotten rid of the rot within the HR department, and what's even crazier is that while Ubisoft did force certain staff members and top executives to retire following accusations, particularly people like Serge, who's built quite the reputation and quite the bullet list of allegations, there are still those out there who engaged in similar behavior but maybe are lower profile who are still at the studio. Games industry reports that some of the men at the heart of the harassment accusations are also still in their jobs, such as Florent Castelnerac, who heads Ubisoft-owned Nadeo and who was accused of harassment by a dozen employees. And it's not just that they're not doing anything about him, they're actively going out of their way to protect him, according to a union representative who said that management is very much protecting him. Doing nothing about this would be very, very bad. But the fact that they're still protecting the abusers, especially after putting out all of these statements about how sorry they are, about how they must do better, about the changes and overhauls that they're enacting to make sure this doesn't happen again, even after all of that, the fact that they're willing to die on this hill just really goes to show how much these executives and people like Yves Guillemot, the CEO, actually care. They don't. They're looking out for the abusers instead of actually thinking about the employees and the people that they're responsible for, the human beings who are miserable under these harassers and these perpetrators. Now, alongside Serge, who with one word could greenlight or cancel a project, and Cecile, head of HR, both of who have resigned now after the allegations, a third executive who resigned was Yanis Mallet, who spearheaded Ubisoft's Montreal studio. He was replaced by Christophe Dernes, but games industry reports that according to sources in Canada in this Montreal studio, nothing has changed since the appointment of Christophe Dernes. And by the way, this individual is Yves Guillemot's cousin. As if Ubisoft didn't protect abusers enough, we're now at a situation where the head of the Montreal studio is now Yves Guillemot's cousin, a family member who will no doubt receive a good amount of protection from the CEO himself. And making an already bad situation worse, new harassment cases have been reported since, but those who reported the issue were sidelined in December of 2020. This was after the July 2020 appointment of Christophe Dernes, and when employees provided feedback about potential initiatives that could be implemented to improve the work environment and the hiring process, their ideas were not addressed by management. They went ultimately ignored. Now, after the article broke and a number of news outlets began reporting about it, Ubisoft provided the following response. Over a period of several months, Ubisoft has implemented major changes across its organization, internal processes, and procedures in order to guarantee a safe, inclusive, and respectful working environment for all team members, says the company that continues to ignore harassment and abuse allegations that continue to happen even today, that have continued to happen over the last few months. And then the representative apparently listed a number of actions that they have taken to prove that, they're taking this seriously. External investigations of all allegation to anonymous reporting tools and mandatory training on appropriate workplace conduct. And then they talked about all of the new appointments, but the new appointments don't matter if those new appointments ultimately are as carefree about abuse within the work environment as the previous executives, especially if you're hiring family members who you will end up protecting even if they misbehave. The representative concluded by saying these concrete actions demonstrate the profound changes that have taken place at every level of the company. Additional initiatives are underway and are being rolled out over the coming months. In roadmap style, we're committed to strengthening our culture and values in the long term to help ensure every team member at Ubisoft is heard, respected, and valued in the workplace. You keep saying that, you keep talking about how you want to do better. Ubisoft executives and representatives can yap their mouth all they want about their commitments and the changes that they've implemented, but the voices that truly matter are those of the victims, the folks who are actually able to say from hands-on experience if things feel different about the work culture and environment. And clearly the changes have not been enough, and it's been months since the allegations have come out. It's been months since Ubisoft has committed to these changes, and if the changes feel like they're minimal still, then obviously Ubisoft isn't taking this issue seriously enough or don't care enough. It does not matter how big Ubisoft's bullet list of changes are, it's all ultimately irrelevant if the employees are reporting back that things are basically same old. The core issue here really is the lack of accountability and consequences. Harassers and perpetrators at Ubisoft feel like they can behave however they want, and there's nothing really stopping them. Or hell, they might even be protected if you're a close friend of Yves or a family member. And so long as that remains the case, it doesn't matter how many systems you implement for employees to be able to submit feedback or to report harassment or inappropriate behavior, or it doesn't matter how many surveys you do if that feedback goes unheard and if there is nobody out there who is impartial enough to be able to take that feedback and deliver swift justice. And what this has all ultimately led to is people hearing about this and getting the hashtag Hold Ubisoft Accountable trending. While it isn't here right now, I myself did see the hashtag in this trending area. And this isn't just members of the community on social media and forums, but you've also got, YouTubers who cover a lot of Ubisoft stuff coming out and saying this is not acceptable, encouraging boycotts. And I hope that with the release of my own video, I can spread the word further, because this is serious stuff. It's very easy to forget when you're playing a game that a lot of work from a lot of people went behind this. It's human beings who are creating these games, and for them to do their best work, They have to be mentally and physically healthy. They have to be happy at their workplace. If they're not, it's just going to ultimately affect the quality of these games and how efficiently they're made. But forget about the games for a moment. These are just people who are being treated like crap in an abusive work environment that only recently full-on came to light. The effect should have been immediate. The changes should have been immediate. And look, I'm not saying that overhauling a company doesn't take time, but if it literally feels like nothing's changed in months, then how much longer is it actually going to take? Frankly, this stuff needs to continue to be talked about. It needs to continue to be reported, and Ubisoft must continue to be pressured. Because if suddenly this story fades into the background, then Ubisoft will just go back to their old ways. And someone like Yves, who has yet to say, I have blame for this, I don't trust them to just do the right thing off of the kindness of his heart, especially when he already has a proven track record of protecting his own friends, protecting his own family members who he hires at his company. Video games are meant to be fun and fulfilling, not just for players, but also for the people making them. And you've got these corporations exploiting the medium, but also exploiting the people who are passionate about that medium, using them as disposable tools. And it's going to affect the quality of the games, but more importantly, it is just human indecency. And it has to be rooted out of Ubisoft. It has to be rooted out of the games industry. It has to be rooted out of all industries. And, that's going to take time. Hell, it's, something that may never go away 100%. But that doesn't mean we should just not do anything about it, just stay quiet about it, and just let this stuff fly. So that's the latest in regards to Ubisoft and an incompetent and abusive leadership, a complacent leadership. Let me know in the comments below what your take is on the latest reports, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.